Welcome to the keynote panel discussion, which explores the broad geopolitical implications of this year's forum theme of competing for the future. It's an opportunity to discuss in detail with our two expert panelists about the threats we face, how we overcome these threats, and the larger global implications that will allow the U.S. to compete in the new world order. Their detailed bios are in the program, and I really recommend that you read about their amazing careers. But let me do a short introduction. First, here with us today is Admiral Michelle Howard, United States Navy retired, the 38th Vice Chief of Naval Operations. She was one of the first women to attend the Naval Academy, and during her groundbreaking career, had an amazing number of firsts. Admiral Howard was the first woman to achieve the rank of 4-star Admiral in the United States Navy, the first African-American woman to reach the rank of 3-star and 4 stars in any branch of the U.S. Armed Forces, and the first African-American woman to command a ship in the United States Navy. In 2016, she served as the commander of naval forces in Europe and Africa, and in 2017, she retired from the Navy after 35 years of incredible service to her country. Admiral Howard, welcome.
Thank you.
And joining us virtually, it's good to see you, sir, retired Admiral and former Ambassador Harry Harris. He served as the 23rd Ambassador of the U.S. to South Korea, as well as Commander of U.S. Pacific Command, now known as U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. During his storied career, Admiral Harris served in every geographic combatant command area of responsibility. I had the great privilege to work with him at U.S. Southern Command and while supporting the Middle East peace process between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. I've had the opportunity to watch firsthand on how his leadership has had such a tremendous impact on U.S. national security. Welcome, sir.
Whoop, 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 whoop.
Glad to be here. Glad to be on a panel with Michelle. Honored to be on a panel with her. And you too, Mike.
Good to see you, sir. All right, well, we have so much to discuss. Rather than starting with some overarching comments, I'd like to just dive right into the discussion. I want to make sure that we leave time for questions because I know there'll be many. So today, as you've heard both yesterday and then earlier today, the United States has entered a great power competition where the United States, along with China and Russia, are competing to shape the security environment, as well as norms and practices around the world. We also see that the great power competition is intensifying, and these territorial tensions becoming more challenging around the world, but we see it in the South China Sea, Taiwan, and in Europe. At the same time, the U.S. must deal with existential threats from regional powers and non-state actors with access to advanced technologies. So I'll start off, Admiral Howard, ma'am, what in your view are the policy, the strategy, or the technological game changers that will enable the U.S. to respond effectively to this in this great power competition?
Well, thank you for that overarching question. But let me start by saying this, because it's got many pieces to it in this. China would love you for how you phrased it. So one of the issues we are dealing with is China's ability to strategically communicate and is winning that sphere, that information operational sphere. The seas are global commons. The South China Sea does not belong to China. It is literally 2,000 kilometers away. The law of the sea is ancient, and literally your territorial seas end at 12 miles. Your EEZ's at 200. And so this dispute in the South China Sea with 6 other nations is of a fiction for China to try and establish this idea that that is our country. No. And it's interesting because if China sit there and said, hey, we own half of space, the world would go, no, you don't. China says we own the cyber domain, the world definitely would say, no, you don't. but we're allowing them to sell us this idea that their regional hegemony is, a huge part of the world's ocean. No. And so the first strategic and policy piece we've got to get after within the United Nations, within this country, is making it clear that there are global commons, and they are meant to the benefit of all mankind, and not allow China to dominate in this messaging. And this is a country that in a big reach went to the arbitrators. And in 2016, The Hague said, no, you're wrong. The law is clear. They continue to force the neighbors they have in dispute to acquiesce to this idea that they own large bodies of oceans. And there's been open media sources that in order to get vaccines from China, if you're the Philippines, for example, we're going to tone down. In fact, we might even indicate we acquiesce to The Hague was wrong, right? So we've got to really, that first area, strategic and policy, understand we're in competition, but understand we have got to figure out as united government and allies how to counter that message. To me, technology, there's just one thing that's coming down the road, and President Xi is investing heavily into it, quantum computing, and that is a game changer. And people, what we are talking about is classical computing is about to reach its edge. So IBM just came out with a viable 2-nanometer chip, which some people didn't say was possible. But beyond that, in order to get to computing and the movement of light and electrons, you're now down to the photon electron level. So President Xi and everybody else understands this is a technological leap. And the best metaphor I've ever heard is there's a candle that gives you light, and there's a light bulb that gives you light. Classical computing to quantum computing is going from a light bulb to electrical. And so you can only imagine the ripple effects across societies in the world once it becomes possible. It is not going to be in the reach of individuals. This is not something that's going to go down to your desktop. But when you talk at the corporate level, at the enterprise level, at the government level, when you talk about being able to model systems that are outside the reach of classical computing, we can do that, but it'll take 1,000 years of computation to get to it. Once you get to quantum computing, those types of problems will be solved in 3 days or 4 days. And so then when you're looking at predictability, being able to accumulate a lot of data, and then you think about R&D, whether it's developing a new vaccine or developing a war plan, the computational accuracy is just, and outcomes is going to be literally, truly changing. And so to me, the fact that China is deeply investing in this, and our government is leaving it up to private concerns to develop this, we need to understand that is, if they get to quantum computing first, there won't be a superpower competition. There'll be China and everybody else.
Thank you, ma'am, very much. Appreciate that. Admiral Harris, sir, I'd appreciate your insights as well. Same question.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'll just start off by saying that in Lori Robinson's, get off the stage comments, she talked about how incredible Michelle Howard is. And then she got off the stage. And so, okay, well, I get it. I know who the draw here is, but I have to agree with her. In the State Department, they have this term that which is kind of cool. It's one of the only 2 things I learned when I was in the State Department. One was, the bread and water thing, how to figure out which dish is your bread dish and which is your wine glass. But the other thing I learned was this term, I associate myself with. And that means whoever the previous speaker is and whatever he or she said, I agree. So I associate myself with everything that Michelle said. I'll just add a few things to her commentary. And one is that, the PRC, and I try to make the distinction when I'm talking about the China, I try to make the distinction that it's the PRC because it is a communist country. It is a People's Republic of China that's causing us this global angst and is making an effort to be the sole superpower, as Michelle so eloquently said. One of the issues that we have, in my opinion, is of our own making, and that is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. When we choose as a nation not to join that, then we find ourselves in this hard place of criticizing a country for not following the outcome of the Hague Convention, the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea, because we're not a member. Now, we say, well, we follow the tenets of the Law of the Sea and on and on and on. But we don't have the moral high ground. So I would hope that the learned members of the Connecticut World Affairs Council and other like organizations can help the United States get a foothold on the moral high ground of the Law of the Sea. The criticism of it is we're going to give up our sovereignty. Well, that is a fiction in my view. We have these deep sea seabed mining opportunities with these manganese nodules and other things, which are critical in the battle for technology in the 21st century. And companies won't mine for them because they're governed by the law of the sea, and we're not a signatory to the treaty. So I think it's important that we figure out a way to get the divided Senate to ratify this thing, which is probably not going to happen in my lifetime. But it's juice worth the squeeze if we can get after it. Hey, on the PRC, I'll just say that the United States and the PRC, we partner well on several important fronts, but we fundamentally disagree on a number of seriously important issues. We think that we fundamentally disagree on our separate approaches to the international order, right? And we think, and I think the facts will play it out that the Chinese government, the PRC, doesn't keep its word. You can go from its treaty with the British on Hong Kong to the human rights abuses, which the State Department, which the Secretary of State calls genocide, strong words, against the Uyghurs in Muslim Western China, and then their attempts at commercial espionage globally, and their efforts to first isolate, then dominate Taiwan. So, we fundamentally disagree with the PRC. That's why I think that this administration and the previous administration have made it clear through the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy that we seek, the United States seeks relationships built on respect and equal footing and market economies rather than dominance and control as the People's Republic seeks to do. We encourage countries rather, to do things in the interests of their sovereignty, which is a positive thing for all of our individual sovereignties, as opposed to following what the PRC would have countries do. So I'll stop there to get off the stage here a little bit and set the conditions, Mike, for your follow-on questions, unless you want me to follow up on anything I've said so far.
No, thanks, sir. I appreciate it. I think that we have a 360-degree view of the great power competition after both of you have talked about it. One thing that I'm going to bring it forward to the current day, if you will, after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, based on the insights that you both just talked about, do you think that it's going to have an effect on this great power competition based on the approaches that both China and Russia have taken in the past? Ma'am, do you want to?
So I think when you look at the withdrawal, I'm sure the Russians are just laughing. Oh, they finally learned, right? And they were probably delighted that we spent so much time there. The good things about the withdrawal is we did hold as fast as best as we could to our Afghan allies, and I think the final numbers I saw from defense is we were able to remove about 120,000 of Afghan allies and family members. The real question will be, a lot of focus on that is that a significant, our leaving Afghanistan, is that a strategically significant event? I think our departure is not strategically significant. What it does, though, is allow strategic opportunities for China, right? So China had already started to move into northern Afghanistan, just like they do around the world. Hey, we'll help you with the mining. We'll bring Chinese labor in. We'll just extract the minerals. We'll give you a reasonable price, and then we'd like to, have ownership of the mines for, the next 100 years or so. So they are going to take advantage of the resources of Afghanistan, I think, and come in and here's the original start place for my Chinese Silk Road. And, try to move in and extract the resources just as they've done around the world. So they'll have that, and they'll make promises to the Taliban. And the good news is, hopefully they won't keep those promises any more than they keep their promises elsewhere. So I think we've created a strategic opportunity for other countries. I think Russia's more insular right now, so I don't think, and they've had their own experience in Afghanistan, so I don't think that you're going to see activity from them. And then I'll turn it over to Admiral Harris, because obviously the ambassador and Admiral Harris are I'm far more familiar with Russia than China, but I defer to his expertise in this area.
Sir, it's interesting. It's almost a replay of what we saw at U.S. Southern Command, where the Chinese would come in and essentially just strip the countries with promises to build a soccer stadium. I'd appreciate your insights as well, sir.
Yeah, so I agree with what Michelle said about creating a strategic opportunity, which, in a zero-sum game means we've lost a strategic opportunity by our chaotic withdrawal first, and then the chaotic nature of it from Afghanistan. The Chinese made hay of it. They talked about it a lot in their media arms, as did Russia. And so, we're in the position of trying to, we find ourselves talking about the great airlift, the greatest airlift in history, but it became that because of the nature of the withdrawal, right? So I'll just back up just a tad and just give you my opinion. And I want everyone to understand clearly it's obviously my opinion since I don't represent the government anymore. But, it's hard to take the podium these days, whether you're virtual or whether you're actual, without somebody talking about Afghanistan, given Michelle's and my, military and your military background. Say, what do you think about Afghanistan? So let me just get right to it. Now, I believe that the president's decision to withdraw was the right decision. Now, there are others smarter than me, H.R. McMaster, for example, who thinks that it was a wrong decision. They should have kept 2,500 troops there. They hadn't had a combat casualty in 18 months. And they were really enabling the Afghans. Okay, I mean that's a good argument and a good point of debate. But I believe that the president's decision was the right decision because he campaigned on it, and then he was elected. And holy cow, here's a politician who actually is following through on his campaign promise. So I think the decision to pull out of Afghanistan was the right decision. However, I believe that the execution of that decision was deeply flawed. Now, it was either an intelligence failure because the intelligence community didn't predict the speed with which the Taliban would take over, in which case it's an intelligence failure and they ought to be held accountable for it. If, however, the intelligence community briefed the National Command authorities about that and the speed with which the Taliban would take over, if they briefed it and they were ignored, then it's a failure of government. And so at the end of the day, I think this is all going to come out. There's going to be just interminable investigations into what happened. And I think, we'll learn where the failure lay, rather. But the nature of because of the collapse, forget who was to blame for a moment, but because of the rapid collapse of the Afghan government and their security forces and the speed with which the Taliban took over, that led to this incredibly flawed execution of the U.S. decision to withdraw from Afghanistan, and this is kind of where we are. So I also think that the president inherited a deeply flawed Taliban deal from the previous administration. President Trump's team, negotiated this deal with the Taliban without including the Afghan national government in that negotiation. They released thousands of Taliban prisoners, which are playing out now in their key roles in the new Taliban government. However, and this is an important however in my view, the current administration and President Biden embraced, not only accepted the previous deal, but they embraced that deal. They only moved the execution date to the right by a couple of months. And therefore, I think that they own that deal. It's their decision. It's their deal now. And they own the decision to withdraw and the aftermath of the way it was withdrawn. I'm not sure why this administration felt it was any more obligated to follow through on this particular aspect of the previous administration's decisions. I mean, when you consider all of the other policies and deals, so to speak, that the previous administration did, that this administration discarded almost immediately upon taking office, but they decided that this one was important, and they kept up with that decision to withdraw. So I think at the end of the day, this is going to have to be explored as well, and it contributed to the chaotic nature of the withdrawal. There are hundreds of Americans probably still left behind, and there are thousands of Afghans who helped the United States who are at risk of their lives and the lives of their families that are left behind. So it's not over yet until we get these people out. And I think that's where our effort is now. But it's hard to follow through on that effort without any representatives in country. So it's going to be a challenge. But this is the mess of our own making. And we have to do the right thing, the morally right thing, and pull these people out, in my opinion.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that very much. I think it really helps the audience, this global audience now, to really have a deeper understanding of what unfolded in Afghanistan and why. So thanks for that. I'm gonna switch from a great power competition to talk a little bit about elements of national power, because traditionally, the United States has relied on diplomacy, information, their military capabilities, and economics to meet or overcome the threats to national security. But in today's strategic environment, we're operating in gray zones around the world. Nation states, non-state actors are constantly applying instruments of power across the entire spectrum of conflict. The question to you, I'll start, Admiral Harris, with you, is that I'd appreciate your insights on, do you believe that these four traditional instruments remain relevant? And if so, do we need to employ them differently, or do we have to consider an entirely new construct when we talk about national security for the future?
Yeah, a great question. I think that the four elements are adequate if you allow each of the four elements to be expanded, right? So this is kind of trying to have the easy answer to a hard question. Cyber and space. Clearly, we can't ignore cyber and space, but if you include them in the information domain, then you don't have to add another letter or two to DIME, right? I mean, everybody speaks about DIME these days. You'd be surprised where I hear that term. because it's taken 15 years or so for that to become part of our lexicon. Now we want to add more letters to it. That's a challenge. But it just depends on how you define information, really, because that's where the new domains become prevalent. You're talking hypersonic missiles and all those capabilities. You can encompass that in the military element of that. Climate change and pandemics are not included. I mean, it'd be a little bit of a stretch, I guess, to include that in economics or something. So you could make an argument, and I would certainly be supportive because it's just an idea of somehow encompassing this new normal that we're in with pandemics. We're in a terrible one now, but it's not going to be the worst one, I don't believe. And then the climate change and all the effects of that, and then demographic changes also. So I think that these are issues that you could happily do it. It's just you're going to have a longer acronym, and you're going to have to figure out how to create that acronym. I think that's kind of where I am on that. Over to Michelle.
Thank you. So, I think by the time I was in my last joint school, it was not dime, it was dime fill, right?
Fill.
But I actually like Newt Gingrich, who said, no, just change the letters around, it becomes midlife. And the issue is not our construct. There's value to any construct because it gives you a common framework around which to talk. The issue is we create the framework and then we are generally less deliberate about our assessment of it. So then, and I know you said you were pulling away from great competition, but I think talking about this construct in great competition, I'll help illustrate what I mean. So when you look at dime, or dime fill or midlife, and then you talk about the competition that's going on now. We're not in cooperation with Russia and China. We're not in conflict. We're in competition. We are watching them exploit the areas that prevent us from going into conflict and prevent us from going into cooperation. They're exploiting us economically. They're exploiting us in the information domain. So we need to just be smart and start looking about how are they doing this. This administration has said we want to re-emphasize alliances. Well, all of our allies and partners are being exploited economically and in the information domain by Russia and China. So rather than just say, I make my first appearance at NATO, let's work together to counter Russia, let's re-emphasize NATO, go farther. We tend to only think of NATO in that Article 5 terms, and it worked. After the U.S. was attacked on 9/11, the only Article 5 in the history of NATO, they're in with us and have been with us in Afghanistan, and many of those member nations have lost soldiers, sailors, and airmen in supporting us in that fight. There's an Article 2 to NATO that focus on the economic cooperation of the member states. The preamble is fantastic. It talks about the social, respecting the social and heritage and the heritage of the peoples of the different nations, deferring to the UN as the ultimate guiding, overarching principle. But if we said not just we want to counter Russia, and it's an Article 5, but let's make it an Article 2. Most of the NATO countries kowtow to Russia because of energy. Russia is their primary, pushes fuel to them. They are not standalone in terms, they're sufficient, they're reliant on Russia for oil, whether it's Germany or Italy. And so they tend to be hesitant in political activity in trying to align to counter Russia because literally the lifeblood of their nation depends on Russia's goodwill. Okay, focus on Article 2, get to that E part of dime or dime fill, and then create within the NATO structure opportunities to build energy capacity, independent energy capacity for the members of NATO. Greece, you've got an arrangement with Israel. We'll help you, Germany will help you develop those gas fields. Croatia has fantastic opportunity off the Adriatic. NATO will help, will focus on Article 2, and will help you develop. And then you achieve independence. And then NATO members, we want you to sell gas and oil to NATO members. Give them priority in sales. Give them a NATO discount, for gosh sakes. Get us off this energy dependence of Russia. Focus on the E, because that's where Russia's focused on. And then that allows these nations to act more in the interest of the nations and the alliance. And so I think there's opportunity there within that construct, but we've got to be more bold and brave about how we counter Russia and China in the areas where they're operating. My personal opinion.
That's a unique insight that I hadn't heard about essentially providing NATO countries with energy independence through those types of initiatives, and now Russia no longer can hold them hostage, their energy hostage. It's amazing insight. Thank you for that, ma'am. The COVID pandemic was a massive disruptor, and Admiral Harris touched on it, across the geopolitical environment and certainly to our national security. The virus has killed now over 700,000 Americans, ravaged our economy, damaged our national security. The U.S. response to the pandemic demonstrated both our resilience and also some vulnerabilities, some key strategic vulnerabilities. A good example, I would say, is the fragility of our defense industrial base. It's going to affect how we approach an uncertain future. Ma'am, I'll start with you. What do you see as the major effects on national security from COVID, and what must we do in the future to overcome them or at least protect ourselves?
I think the first thing we have to grapple with is the long-term generational impact, right? This is 700,000 people, and if you think about it in 6 degrees of separation, this is not, it's going to change the psyche of the country. You think about how the psyche changed with a couple thousand people being killed on 9/11, and this is much more impactful and much more widespread. And we're going to have to watch, and I could just imagine with the potential, there's going to be future pandemics. We just, there was one 100 years ago, and there's going to be more. You can almost sense that the American public's going to want to withdraw even more because of, you now not only have this, we need to take care of ourselves, but it's actually literally dangerous. And there's going to be people who are going to say, I lost my mother, I lost my father, I lost my child, and it's going to be with them for the rest of their lives, and it's going to be told to the children who survived. You never got to meet your Uncle so-and-so because he died in the great pandemic. And so we need to make sure we are looking at the psyche, and somehow we have got to get to a leadership position strategically where we remind the American people that our history may not be as long as other countries, but we are survivors, and we're not just survivors, we're thrivers. And that our heritage is involved in leadership in this world, and we will have to, at some point, return to that. And we can psychologically now want to return to that, but the world has a way of keep getting us back in. And so the American people, the best missions I had were where I represented the American people on the ground with nations in trouble. Tsunami relief efforts in Indonesia. Never been prouder. And interesting enough, you do something like that and you inadvertently open up a nation and dialogue that just hadn't existed before. In a majority Muslim country, you're on the ground, and as big as Indonesia's, 17,000 islands, encompassing an area the size of the United States. Unlike a lot of other countries, very little English is spoken. And so when I and my fellow MU commander, we went ashore, I wasn't sure in a Muslim country how I would be treated, but I tell you, wherever we went, men and women and children came running up, children hugging us, people touching us, saying thank you in Indonesian. America is here, America is here. And I'm sure our counterparts from Germany and Singapore had the same, but when we support the world knows we're sincere about it. China and Russia can't say that. And so I want to live to be old and live, and a proud American who knows my country still has leadership and is willing to elevate the world.
Thank you, ma'am. Admiral Harris?
Yeah, so thanks, Michelle, for that commentary as well. So look, I think that one of the things, and there are a lot of things, clearly, but one of the key things that has made our country a leader in the world, and you both are part of that world now, Mike with Pratt and Whitney and Michelle with IBM. It's our leadership in innovation, science, and technology. There's no country on earth that can equal America in our science, technology, and innovation and inventions and all of that. But I believe that one of the negative outcomes, besides all of the deaths and the human suffering of the COVID pandemic, which is enormous, we've all lost friends and family members to COVID. I think that one of the biggest downfalls, and we're going to have to grapple with it as a nation and as a society, is we have lost our trust in science and medical experts and all of that. Social media, the dark side of social media has enabled many conspiracy theories to come to the fore. And one of those bodies of conspiracy theories is a significant sowing of mistrust in science and the sowing of misinformation writ large. And I think that's going to hurt us in systemic ways long term. We have, rather than listen to your doctors and your scientists, your PhDs, and all that about COVID and the ways to defeat it, we listen instead to charlatans and other folks on social media that would encourage you to take a pill that's designed to prevent worms in livestock, right? I mean, where did that come from? And so, people believe that these days, and they don't believe the scientists and the doctors who are trying to save lives. And my experience in Korea, I learned a lot there. I was there for all of 2020, really at the quote unquote. I mean, you can debate the beginning of it, but really the beginning of the COVID pandemic in January and February of 2020 through all of 2020, and I left in January 21. And so here we are in Korea, and they went on lockdown in Seoul when they had 1,000 cases a day in a country of 52 million people across Korea, South Korea. Now, let me say that one more time. They went on lockdown when they had 1,000 cases a day across a country of 52 million people. And to date, they've had roughly 260 to 270,000 cases total, and about 2,000 deaths. Now, America, our country, our great country, we've had over 40 million cases. Just this week, I think today, we're crossing the 700,000 death threshold. And we have suffered 1,500 cases a day, deaths, 1,500 deaths a day. And Korea went on lockdown when they had 1,000 cases a day. What I used to say when I was serving in Korea was South Korea is a country that follows the rules. That's masking and all the other stuff. They follow the rules and they follow the science. And I kind of, kind of left it at that. So I think that we have a lot to learn from other advanced countries. And my experience is most recently with South Korea and how to fight the pandemic and win. I'm not sure we're there yet in the United States.
Thank you, sir. I think now we can open it up to questions. I know that there'll be.
Goes both for this one, but also the 1240 forum, 50 forum. You've also in 1900 you have this new president who took over from a previously assassinated president, who brought to the table this concept to talk soft but carry a big stick. This concept that a good navy is not an insurance of war, but a guarantee of peace. The question is, would the concept of the Roosevelt Corollary, be more important now than it ever has been?
You're not going to get anything but an absolute yes from two admirals. Thank you. Thank you. I think I owe you $100 for asking that question, and I'll write you a check afterwards. Before Roosevelt, who some claim, he stole his work from Mahan, but at the age of 25 is when he started to write his first thesis on, and it was at the tactical level, battleship against battleship. And, I think about, it's the Federalist Papers, where John Adams is arguing that we need a Navy. And it ends up in the Constitution, so that's why Congress maintains a Navy and provisions an Army. And I'll paraphrase, but what John Adams pointed out was that the world is full of capricious tyrants. We, as a nation, in order to be successful, to be prosperous, will have to engage in trade. If you don't have a strong Navy, you are at the mercy of these capricious tyrants. They'll take your cargo, and little did he know, but by the early 1800s, the Ottoman bays would be doing just that. And then off the Navy is in its first Barbary War, its first war. The world has changed, the mission has changed, but capricious tyrants still exist. They just have new names: China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. And so our ability to protect this country and this economic powerhouse to the prosperity of citizens will last as long as the oceans. So as long as the world's 75% water, there will be a need for a Navy as a sort of independence for our nation.
Sir?
I associate myself with what Michelle said, but I'll also add that I consider myself a joint warrior first and a naval officer second. So the Earth is certainly covered with 75% of the Earth's surface is water, but I would submit that 100% is covered by air, and space sits above it all. So it is a necessity that we resource our joint force capabilities, whether they're the Navy, the Air Force, Marines, the Army, or the Space Force, in order to do as President Roosevelt said, and carry a big stick. I'll also just opine that he was not about speaking softly himself, as we all know. But the idea of carrying a big stick and wielding it when necessary, but not in a tyrannical fashion, I think is important and applies to the United States in the 21st century. So it is important. It is vital that we resource the joint force and all the components of it in order to meet the threats that are out there. A strong military is the best guardian of peace. Someone else said that. We probably named a ship after him who said it. But it's vital, and I think there's debate about should we resource the defense of the ballistic missile defense of Guam. Well, how can that be a debate? Guam is a part of the United States. It's where America's Day begins, as the Guamanians proudly say. And a missile defense of Guam is the first step to missile defense of Hawaii, the missile defense of the West Coast of the United States, all the way to the missile defense of Connecticut. So it's important that we resource this. And the idea that the thought rather that we're having a debate whether we should or should not baffles me. And I'm glad to see it in the NDAA, the House's version of the National Defense Authorization Act for 2022, and hopefully that idea of missile defense of Guam will see its way through the final version as it works its way through the Senate.
Thank you, sir.
So I know we want to go to concluding thoughts, but one quick question from Zoom. I think it's John from Minnesota. And following up on Admiral Howard, who spoke about NATO and the alliance. So how do you view the current and future, how do you view the strength of current and future alliances with shifting global dynamics? Does the Quad become a more important alliance than NATO? So what are your views on the future?
So right now our biggest fault line in NATO is internally and externally, U.S. relationship with Turkey and the Turkey's relationship with other NATO countries as Turkey cooperated with Russia in Syria and then going farther. We are going to have to work our way through that and get to a different place within NATO and almost go back to founding principles and make sure we are clearly bringing Turkey back into the fold. I think if we can get there, then NATO, which is probably the oldest alliance, 1949, I think is going to have a purpose in life for at least another 50 years. And then I just, for all of the alliances, whether they're more loosely or treaty relationships we have with other countries, our allies, vice our partners, it's the same idea that we look at where we have common areas where we can work and we say, look, if we can help you get to self-sufficiency, less dependent on China or less dependent on Russia, depending on who you're talking to, or less dependent on both, depending on who you're talking to in Africa, and do that as an alliance, then we'll not only be raising the opportunity and prosperity of those nations, but we'll be pulling them away from the orbits of our competitors.
Thank you, ma'am. As much as I would like to continue this conversation forever, I know both of you are incredibly busy, and so we're close to wrapping up. Admiral Harris, sir, would you like to give some final comments?
Let me just expand a little on Michelle's answer to the previous question, because I think the questioner mentioned the Quad. So, NATO is a multilateral alliance. The United States has only 5 bilateral defense treaties in the whole wide world. They're all in the Indo-Pacific, right? It's Japan, Korea, Australia, the Philippines, and Thailand. So these are bilateral defense treaties that encumber the United States to come to the defense of these countries if certain conditions are met, depending on each of the treaties. But there are 2 new groupings in the Indo-Pacific that are really interesting. The first is the Quad. The Quad is not NATO-like, nor is it ever going to be NATO-like. It's a grouping of like-minded nations, India, Australia, the United States, and Japan. One of the first things in the Biden administration, you had the Quad leaders, the 4 leaders got together on VTC, and they're meeting either this week or at the end of last week in actuality to discuss the Quad. And one of the first things out of the chute was a commitment to a concerted joint effort, combined effort on the pandemic, which is really interesting, right? I mean, this is a sort of a defense-centric, you would think, but no, actually it's not. It's for all those things that are not defense-related, but are important to our countries in the Indo-Pacific. And the question then becomes, should other countries join the Quad? Can they join the Quad? And I always respond to that by saying, you know, the Big Ten has 14 teams and the Big 12 has 10 teams. So that doesn't mean the Quad has to have 4 teams. And why not? But there's no gatekeeper. We're not the gatekeeper. India, Japan, and Australia are not gatekeepers either. So there's no mechanism for another country to join. And there ought to be, and I've called for a Quad secretariat to be formed. And some countries think that that's too formal. Well, I mean, that's the only way I think you're going to be able to establish some kind of a baseline for memberships in it. So the second one, on the other hand, the second new grouping that's just formed is really exciting to me. And it is a defense pact, and it is in the Indo-Pacific, but it involves the UK, the United Kingdom, and Australia and the United States together. So this is a tripartite pact centered on defense, centered in the Indo-Pacific, and focused on Australia. And part of this is going to be that the United States and Great Britain will share our nuclear submarine technology with the Australians. Now that is a game changer in my view, and is fundamentally exciting and interesting. And this is all about the country that the 3 leaders said it's not about, but it is about the PRC. And it has set the PRC on notice that their behavior writ large in the Indo-Pacific is unacceptable, and their own behavior is forcing countries to group together in ways like the Quad, informally, and now the AUKUS, crazy, crappy nickname, but the AUKUS relationship for defense in the Indo-Pacific. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Admiral Howard?
So we've talked about a few things today, but let me end with this idea. This is about innovation, right, in competition. And my first vote would be we need to quickly rebuild State Department and the expertise, and if possible, bring back some of those fantastic public servants. And then when we look at whatever construct we pick, whether it's dime or midlife, we have an opportunity, I think, using the whole of government and the diverse perspectives of the different agencies. I think there's like 76 government agencies in our government, to start looking at this through a lens and start saying, our default tends to be defense. There are probably innovations that we can achieve diplomatically. There's innovations we can achieve economically. We have got to figure out how to incubate matrix across the government and get to those wonderful ideas that are probably sitting at some recent college graduate's desk, in the bowels of Treasury, right? And we have talent out there across our public sector that we've got to tap into. And that would be my wish for a greater America.
Thank you, ma'am, very much. As we get ready to close, you could see I was furiously writing. I was trying to think of how I could give an executive summary, and I think I probably failed miserably. But one thing that both Admiral Harris and Admiral Howard talked about that really came to the forefront, and that is the importance of the U.S. as a world leader. And that we cannot return to the isolationism of the 1920s, the world needs U.S. leadership. It needs our country and our communities to remain engaged on a global scale to the betterment of all. That's why I think this forum, the Global Security Forum, and the work that the World Affairs Councils do to continue to engage at the individual and the community levels in order to have a greater understanding of our world and how we can make it better. And so for both of you, all I can say is thank you very, very much for spending time with us today. I found it to be a fascinating and amazingly educational forum for all of us. Please give a round of applause for our fantastic panelists. Thank you, man. Thank you, sir.